Hey everybody. So if you are on this video, then you have clicked on the sub-tab in the Week 8 module under the Introduction to Research lesson. And hopefully you have already looked over the handout on Basic APA Format Guide and the sample APA essay, as well as the very short PowerPoint that I included. So you're going to see 3 videos here. Each video is going to go over each of those previous sub-tabs. So this video is going to cover the Basic APA Format Guide. So we are not doing a research paper in Composition 1. That is usually something that is saved for Composition 2. Comp 1 is really more about just the basics of writing and understanding, introductions, thesis statements, paragraph development, conclusions, and different modes of writing. So you may not get a lot of research information until you get to Comp 2. However, some of you may not even have to take Comp 2. Others of you might take it, but it might be later. Either way, there's a good chance that if you haven't already, you will be expected to use APA format in some way in your other courses. So before you leave my class this quarter, I want to at least make sure you understand the basics of APA format. What do we mean by APA format? First of all, APA stands for the American Psychological Association, right? Psychological, that's what the P is for. I don't think a lot of people realize that it's the American Psychological Association that puts out APA format. They're the ones that create it, make the changes, decide on things. They make all the decisions regarding APA format. So that's where it comes from. Why? What does it mean? Like, what is this format all about? There are different kinds of formats that you might, have come across or hear mentioned in classes. There's in addition to APA, there's MLA, which stands for Modern Language Association. And then there's also Chicago style, and there's a couple others. Those are the 3 big ones. APA and MLA are the 2 big ones. So what are we talking about with formats? All we're really talking about is the design of a paper and how you document your sources. That's it. There's very little difference between the different types of formats, and that's all that they refer to. When you talk about APA format, it is not a scary, complicated thing. If you understand what it's actually talking about, it makes it a little easier to deal with. So for APA format, we use this format in more of the sciences and technology fields, whereas MLA is really more in like the humanities and especially in like English or literature. And the reason that each group uses a particular format, honestly, it boils down to the current research. So for instance, when you're dealing with literature, you might be writing an essay on a Shakespearean play written in the 1600s, right? The early 1600s. There are thousands upon thousands of articles and essays and books already out there on every single thing Shakespeare ever wrote. But you're writing an essay on Romeo and Juliet, let's say. And even though there's just millions of other things out there, you are giving a unique perspective on it. However, you're expected to use research and to add to the discussion that already exists out there about Romeo and Juliet. So you might be, not only is your primary source hundreds of years old, but The research you include in your analysis, in your essay, might be 20 years old, 25 years old, 50 years old. Who knows, right? So the date of your sources, the date that your sources were published, is not as big a deal when you're writing in a field that uses MLA format. However, when you're dealing with things in the healthcare field, in the sciences, in the technology field, you want current information. You want the information and the resources you use to be as current and up to date as they can possibly be. So that's why you will often be asked to use APA format. And that's because APA format highlights the year of publication, whereas MLA doesn't. That's the only reason why you're using one over the other, is because APA focuses more on current research. So that's why we use APA. Now, what does it mean? What does APA consist of? So I mentioned earlier that any format is really talking about two things: the design elements and how you treat your sources. So you can see on the handout here, I talk about the design elements first. So if you're writing in APA format, the first thing that you would be expected to have as far as the design of the essay goes is a title page. And that title page has very specific information that's supposed to be included on it. You don't even have a title page in MLA format. But you do in APA, very specific information, which we will look at. The other thing that you're expected to have in APA format is a running head and page numbers. So the running head refers to that area at the very top of the page. So like when you start a new document in Word, the cursor is automatically down a little bit. It doesn't start all the way up at the top of the page. It comes down. That's because that top part is reserved as the header. And the same thing goes for the bottom. When you get all the way down to the bottom, and it's about to go to the next page, there's still a little area there. That's the footer for footnotes. So in the header, the heading area, APA format requires, on the left-hand side, you're going to have your title in all caps, and on the right-hand side, you're going to have the page numbers, right? So that's what we mean when we're talking about the running head and page numbers. And it will show up on every single page because you've put it in the header. You don't have to type it at the top every time you switch to a new page. If you use the header function and you type it one time on the first page, it will automatically show up on every other page you type, right? The next thing that APA format will typically have is an abstract page. This is the second page of the essay, so the title page is the first page, page 1. Page 2 is typically an abstract. You may or may not actually have an abstract in the essays that you write for your classes. It's really more when you're dealing with like full-on true research, like you're going out and doing the experiments, or you're doing the surveys, or you're conducting this or doing that. Not just gathering information from sources. But it is technically an element that is supposed to be included in an APA essay. So page 2 is the abstract. What the abstract is just a summary of the paper. So what your purpose is, what you're trying to show, what you're trying to prove, what methods you used, and a brief glimpse at the conclusions that you drew. The other thing that APA format often has is, in addition to the title of the essay, it usually has headings and subheadings throughout it as well. Again, that might not be something that's required for the essays that you write for your courses here, but it might be. So that's it. Design elements. It's just those things for APA format. And once you understand what each of those design elements entails, it's smooth sailing from there on out as far as that element goes. The other thing that we refer to when we're talking about using a specific type of format for a research essay has to do with how you treat your sources. No matter what format you're writing in, if you're using outside information in your essay, you have to give credit to that information, to the authors who originally wrote it. Doesn't matter. MLA, APA, Chicago, they all of them. You have to cite your sources. Otherwise, it's plagiarism. The difference here is, how do you keep track of your sources? So in MLA format, you'll see, you'll read a paragraph, and somewhere in the paragraph or at the end of the paragraph, there'll be this section in parentheses that has an author's last name, a comma, and then a page number. In APA format, whenever you cite a source in your essay, what goes in the parentheses is the author's last name, a comma, and the year. Again, that's because APA is focused on, it's really important to show that you're using current information. So you let your reader know that right when you cite that source, because you have to cite it no matter what. You have to give credit in the body of the essay whenever you're using outside information. But for APA format, you're including that year so that your reader knows right then and there that this is current information and that it's reliable information. So that's the one thing about APA format, what goes in parentheses in the body of the essay when you cite your source. Last name, comma, year of publication. So the next thing that you have to worry about then is, if you've cited a source in the body of your essay, then it has to go, you have to have a full reference entry for it on the reference page, which comes at the end of the essay. You might have heard this referred to as a works cited page. Sometimes maybe a bibliography, but that's not quite accurate. But I have heard it referred to as a bibliography before. But we call it it's reference list in APA. And when you get to that page at the end of the essay, it starts on a new page, right? So even if the last page of the body of the essay, let's say, ends at the top of page 11, and you've got all this extra space on page 11, you leave it blank. The references start on page 12. They start on a brand new page. And you'll see centered at the top in regular font is just references. And then you list all the references, all the sources that you used in the body of the essay. So it provides the full citation. So in the body of the essay, every time you use a source, you have to give credit for it right then and there every single time. That's where the parentheses come in. Author's last name, year of publication. But you want to make sure that your reader, if they want, they could go find that source on their own and read it for themselves. And you want to give them, as much information as possible so they can easily find your source. So that's what the reference entry is for. It goes with that information that's in parentheses, but it gives them all the information, not just the author's name, not just the year of publication, but the full title, where you found it, if it's a book, where it was published, all those things. If it was something on the internet, you give the URL, the address, the web address for it. So you make sure in that reference entry that you provide all the information your reader needs to go find that source on their own. So that's how they match up. That's how the reference list relates to what you do in the body of the essay. And there's a rule here that you need to make sure you know. If you have used a source in the body of your essay and given the citation for it, the part in parentheses, that source must appear on your reference list. It has to. Likewise, if there is a source listed on your reference page, it has to be cited at least once in the body of the essay. There should not be an entry on your reference list for a journal article that you never even used or referred to in the body of your essay. If it gets cited in the essay, it has to appear on the reference list. If it appears on the reference list, it has to be cited at least once in the body of the essay. Keep that in mind. So the reference entry starts with the author's last name. Just like in the parentheses, you provide the author's last name. The reason we do that is so that the reader can look at what's in parentheses and say, oh, this was Smith, published in 2018. Okay, I'm glad to know that this is current information, published in 2018, but I want to read the whole thing, so I know that the author's last name is Smith. I'm going to go flip to the reference page, go down in alphabetical order, and there is Smith, comma John, 2018, and I see the entire reference entry so that I now can go look it up myself. That's how the information in the parentheses relates to the reference list. So you have your references, every single one of them that's been used in the body of the essay, listed on that reference page. It goes in alphabetical order according to the first word of the entry. 99% of the time, the first word of the entry is going to be the author's last name, right? However, there are some cases, especially in today's age, where we have so much information on the internet. As long as it's a reliable site, it may not have an author attached to it. So then the reference entry will begin with something different. Obviously, it can't start with the author's last name because there is no author. So it will probably start with the title, right? Or the heading of that section of the web page. Either way, even if it's not a last name, whatever that first word is, it still gets put in alphabetical order with the rest of your entries. So there's not like a special section for sources with no authors. It still gets put in alphabetical order according to the first word of the entry. The reference page is double spaced, just like the rest of the essay. It's not numbered. They're just listed alphabetically. It's double spaced, just like the rest of the essay. There's no extra spaces in between anything. That goes for the entire essay. There are no extra spaces. Once you get to the end of something, even if it's one word centered, like the title references in the middle of the page, you hit enter one time and you start the first entry. Same thing with the body of the essay. You got your title on when you start the essay, your title is centered, and you hit enter one time, and there's your opening line. No extra spaces, no special fonts, right? Nothing's bold, nothing's italicized, nothing's underlined, nothing is in a bigger font or a smaller font. Everything is very uniform from start to finish in an APA essay. The other last thing about a reference entry is that, there'll be what's called a hanging indent. It's like the opposite of a paragraph. So, when you start a new paragraph, you hit the tab button and it moves that first line over like 5 spaces. And then all the rest of the lines come back out to the margin. It's the exact opposite with a reference entry. The first line starts all the way out at the margin, and then every other line in that entry is indented, is tabbed 5 spaces. And there's a way to do that when you're working in Word. You can have it do a hanging indent within the function of if you're doing research. If you tell Word that you're writing an APA essay, it will help you format things correctly. So that's it, guys. That's what APA format is. APA format is those few design elements you have to make sure of, and then how you treat your sources, how you cite them in the body of the essay, and how you cite them in full on the reference page. That's it. So I know everybody kind of gets freaked out a little bit thinking about APA format, but if you just keep in mind that that's all it's really about, then it takes some of that pressure off and you can just write an essay. Don't worry about all these little details in the very beginning. You can go back and create a correct title page. you can, go back and create an abstract. You can go back and create a correct header. And as long as you keep track of all the information for each source you use, you can create a reference entry at any point, right? So you just do your research and write your essay. Make sure you cite your sources every time you refer to one in the body. But I even tell students, even if you're not citing it correctly, just do something. Put something in parentheses and then highlight it or something to remind yourself to go back and fix it so that it's the correct way. But don't let it trip you up in the beginning. These are all just little details that can be fixed or amended at any point during the process. But just, take some of that pressure off of yourself and realize that when we talk about writing an essay, an APA research paper, it is not as scary as it sounds. Now the research, the research itself can be scary, but writing the actual essay in APA format is really not that big of a deal. The design elements and how you treat your sources, that's it. So the next video is going to go over the sample APA essay. That was the next sub-tab after the basic format guide handout. So hopefully you've looked, you'll look over that essay, and then I'm going to go through it with you and hit some of the highlights so that you can have a visual for all the things that I just talked about. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and move on to that video on the sample APA research essay.